We're the Fowlers. This is my wife Kathy, and this is her husband Tommy. Uh, I've been a member of the church. I've been attending the church all my life, except for 4 years in the Air Force. And if you count the 9 months my mother carried me in her room, you could add 9 months to that. I grew up in a Christian home, and they believed that every activity at the church we had to be there. I was fortunate in that God put me in a home with Christian parents, and we never missed a church activity. My dad was a deacon, and my mother was in WMU. Uh, she was a church custodian in the 50s, and they both sang in the choir when me and my brother and sister were old enough to sit by ourselves in church. They would sing in the choir. Uh, let's see. Back then, the old sanctuary was heated by a large stove powered by butane that heated the whole room, or at least most of it. The baptistry was located between the stage and the choir, where the choir sat. Uh, During Christmas, they would decorate the sanctuary for Christmas, including a Christmas tree. And then we had a Christmas party where all the kids received a gift to take home with them. Uh, I was saved and accepted Christ when I was 7 years old, and the pastor of our church, Tom Baird, baptized me in January of 1950. Um, I am 78 years old, and I've been in church all my life, and I've been a member of the church for 71 years. That's why I have to have notes, because I can't remember all those things. My dad wanted all of his kids to learn how to play the piano, and that included my brother and my sister and myself. And at some point, my brother decided that he didn't want to do that anymore. And he was the older brother, and whatever the older brother wanted to do, the little brother wanted to do too. And unfortunately, they let us quit, and I wish I had kept going. My sister continued taking lessons and eventually became the church pianist and organist until she died. Uh, the men of the church built the old education building that we're about to tear down. It was never intended as a temporary building. Um, Mrs. Pat Terrell told me that when she was a little girl, she helped serve sandwiches to the men who were building that building. Um, let's see. They had when they finished the building, they had a restroom upstairs and a restroom downstairs. The upstairs restroom was for the men, and the downstairs restroom was for the women. And there was a little hallway that the door opened onto to go into that restroom for the women. And just past it, going down a little short hall, there was a door to open storage that was located under the stairs going up to the second floor. And if you kept going down that little hall, you'd come to an exit. And you go out that door, and there's another small building there that was where they had a nursery, and they called it Babyland. Some of my closest friends were, as teenagers, was Roger Glenn, Stan Hite, Gene Bells, Paul Murphy, and Don Walker. Uh, Even though Arthur Johnson was younger than us, we still let him tag along with us. They have all passed away now, with the exception of me and Stan Hite and Paul Murphy. And the three of us are still good friends to this day. Paul is still my best friend.
My earliest remembrances of Ash Creek were in the 1950s. My family lived in Fort Worth, and my grandparents, Walter and Annie Feimster, lived out here at Azle and were members of Ash Creek. So occasionally we would come out as a family to go to church with them on Sundays. And then I can really remember the summer months because it was always crowded in that little chapel. And it was hot. The ladies would sit with those old pasteboard fans and this all the time. And I think those fans came from the funeral home. Not sure. In August of 1958, my parents decided to move out here to be closer to my grandparents. And my mother and daddy, Garland and Catherine Feimster, and my eldest brother, Gary, all joined Ash Creek. And at that point in time, they had a building program and had finished the basement of our present sanctuary building. and the basement became the sanctuary. Anyway, to get to that basement, you had to go in that south side door and descend steps. So we all had to go downstairs to go to worship. In September of that year, 1958, my younger brother, Ronnie Feimster, and I accepted Christ as our Savior. We joined Ash Creek and were baptized on the same Sunday by Reverend J.D. McCarty. My Sunday school teacher at that time was Mrs. Anna Laura Cutshaw, and my GA leader was Miss Wimmaloo Fowler, Tommy's sister. Anyway, I can remember one night after GA's, Wimmaloo took me across the street where a bunch of boys were playing basketball and introduced me to this guy. Anyway, we always had a lot of fun on Wednesday nights going to GA's and Sunday nights training union. In the 1960s, Ash Creek was the place to go if you were a youth living in Azle. And that's because most of the other churches really didn't have an active youth program. And we did at Ash Creek. Our youth minister at that time was Cliff Ennan. And sometimes on Sunday nights, we had as many as 40 or 50 young people to go and come to our youth activities. Well, that was a lot of young people at that point in time. Anyway, one of the homes that we would often go to was Jim Bob and Burl Nation. And when you went to their house on Sunday nights, you were always served tuna fish sandwiches.
Every time.
Every time. But I loved tuna fish, no problem. Anyway, I also enjoyed the activities that we would do on these Sunday nights. We would have all kinds of table games. We played basketball, volleyball. We had Bible study, and we also memorized Bible verses. I loved every minute of those activities. And I also loved that every year the youth had a Valentine banquet. And one year, Tommy and I were crowned the king and queen of the banquet. We got to sit at the head table. It was fun. I remember wearing a red satin dress that my mother made me. And then I had some real fancy costume jewelry that was red. And my grandmother had given me that. In 1964, our interim music director was Greg Berry. Mr. Berry was the high school band director and the choir director. Well, in my junior and senior year, I believe, I was in the choir at Azle High School. And one of my best friends, Norma Nation, and I sang in that choir. And Norma was the daughter of Jim Bob and Burl Nation. Anyway, Ash Creek at the time, there was no youth choir. So Mr. Berry decided that we needed to come and sing in the adult choir. We did, and I felt very grown up wearing my choir robe on Sunday mornings. Anyway, the new sanctuary was completed and dedicated, I believe, in January of 1965. And on September the 18th, 1965, Tommy and I were married at Ash Creek. The officiating pastor was Reverend O.D. Oliver. And the organist at our wedding was Mrs. Wimmaloo Fowler Cook, Tommy's sister. We had a wonderful time. And at the time, also, Tommy was in the Air Force. And he was stationed at Dice Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. And most every weekend, we would come home. But the few occasions, really, very few occasions, that we did not come home, we would occasionally go to church with his aunt and uncle who lived in Abilene, and they were members of the First Baptist Church in Abilene. Well, of course, they wanted us to join that church, but we decided not to move our membership. So you can really say that we have been members of Ash Creek our entire married life.
I was in the Air Force from February 1964 until February 1968. And when I was discharged, we moved back to Azleland and returned to activities at the church. I've never been a member of any other church. I've only been a member of Ash Creek. I remember that in 1975, I joined the adult choir, and Albie Allison was minister of music at that time, and I've enjoyed singing in the choir ever since 1975. Our son Cortland was born in 1966, and he was baptized at Ash Creek in 1978. And he and his wife Kim were married at Ash Creek. And his son, my grandson, Cullen, was also baptized at Ash Creek. So we're pretty much at Ash Creek clan.
Okay, I can remember one year that this was in the 1970s, and it was during a revival. And the baptistry overflowed. Water went down through light fixtures and flooded the basement. Well, there were several of us downstairs in the basement mopping madly, trying to keep it from getting worse and going to all of the classrooms that were downstairs. And we worked all of this time, and thank goodness we did not disturb the revival service upstairs. But Tommy and I were conspicuously absent when it came time for the choir special.
I didn't notice it.
But anyway, I have enjoyed being able to serve my church in several different areas. I've always been a sanctuary choir member. I was a Sunday school teacher. At one point, I was a Sunday school department director. I was church clerk. And I have been a participant in practically every committee and maybe mission teams, I think now they're called, that there ever was. I've enjoyed and I do enjoy serving my church in any way that I can. But I have to say that the toughest position or job on a committee that I've ever had was the finance committee. They work very, very hard. And to this day, I still watch all of the financial paperwork that we receive at the business meetings. I watch it very carefully.
Brother Jim was our pastor from 1981 to 1988 when he felt the call to uh, be, be the pastor of Haskell Church, which is due north of Abilene. He and Roger Glenn and I became real good friends, and we would go to visitation on Tuesday nights, and most of the time we were the only three there that showed up to visit. And sometimes, not very often, but occasionally there would be a time where there were no cars for us to go visit. So at least on two occasions I know we went to watch the Rangers play baseball. But don't tell anybody. When he and Sammy, when he retired from the ministry, he and Sammy both moved back to Azleland and joined back to Ash Creek Baptist Church. He was the chaplain for the Wise Old Men's Breakfast. Every time he led in prayer and thanked God for our food, and asked him to bless it and other things he prayed for. I've been on numerous committees and done it and participated in numerous activities and enjoyed every one of them. At one point or other, I was a Sunday school teacher. I was a department director. I was a Sunday school director. I was a deacon, and several times I was a friend of the deacons. And I was also a greeter in the parking lot. On one occasion, I was a member of a committee that met with a representative from the Texas Baptist, and in a meeting, everyone introduced themselves to that person. And Wesley started off by saying what his name is, and he was the pastor. And when he got around to me, I introduced myself, told him I'm the church waiver. And the person said, "What's a church waiver?" So Wesley explained that I stand in the parking lot and wave at cars. uh, so I've participated in several activities at church and still plan to. Uh, we look forward to whatever God has in store for the future of the church. We hope to be there as long as He allows us to be there. Um, we've been blessed to meet and marry at Ash Creek, and it's been a major part of our lives ever since we started dating. The end.